I don't know what's going to happen in terms of, quote, releasing my addiction all over again, as the NA book says. I felt it was worth the risk because I was really worried about my well-being and my life as far as potentially dying by suicide. And so the way I've said it is, it felt like the risk of not using psychedelics was greater than the risk of using them.
Welcome to Psychedelics in Recovery Integration Radio, a safe space where PIR, also known as persons in recovery, come and share their experience, strengths, and hope with us, with you. My name is Anne, and I'm a person in recovery and your host today. This radio is part of PIR's ongoing effort to carry the message of recovery to those still suffering. In alignment with the 12 traditions that guide our fellowship, this program will not be funded by outside contributions. PIR, as an organization, has no opinion on outside issues. While we discuss plant medicine and psychedelics in this episode, PIR does not promote or endorse their use. The spiritual intention of PIR and of this broadcast is to create diverse, safe, and sacred spaces for all who wish to recover, always thriving for humilities over hubris and principles before personalities. Whether you're new to the idea of integrating psychedelics or plant medicine in your recovery process, new to recovery or a long-time member of the fellowship, our aim is to create a space of curiosity, connection, and hope. In this first series, entitled Journeys of Healing, we explore the intersection of recovery and the transformative potential of psychedelic medicine through some of our members' experience. So settle in, open your mind, and let's walk this path together. This is Integration Radio. And today it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Steve O, who's come to share his experience, strength, and hope about PIR, about his psychedelic recovery. Hello, Steve, and thank you very much for coming today.
Hi, Anne. My pleasure.
How are you?
I'm good. I mean, there's a lot going on in my life, so I am showing up the best way I can. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for this. Can you please give us a bit of background on how you qualified for your first fellowship? Which one was it? How old were you? And the journey to PIR or to psychedelics, whichever came first.
Well, my first fellowship was Narcotics Anonymous, which I joined when I was 25 years old. I'm not going to get way into details about, war stories or whatever. I was using on a daily basis, and I was at a point in my life where I was feeling really lost. I would say I was approaching unemployable and homeless. I was actually living in my van, which was well before these fancy $150,000 Sprinter vans and whatnot. But I was looking for meaning in my life, and something wasn't quite right. I don't know that I could fully articulate it at the time, but I knew that I needed help because I was having, like I said, a hard time functioning as a person in society and holding down a job. So I actually reached out to my parents, and I remember leaving them a voicemail, and this was the best way I could articulate it. Well, back then it was probably a message on an answering machine, but I said, I'm having troubles, which it's a kind of an odd term, but I think it was simply me reaching out for help. And so they were not in denial as much as I was, and I guess because they suggested I find some help for my substance use. And so I found my way into Narcotics Anonymous, like I said, when I was 25. And I really had no idea that there were other people that felt the way I did, as far as feeling lost and trying to, and using drugs on a daily basis and everything that goes along with that. And so, yeah, I jumped in. I guess the denial got stripped away fairly quickly. And I remember one of the first times early on in my recovery, in NA that it was one of the first places I felt welcome in a long time, because I was really isolated, and the way I was living, I wasn't, wasn't really part of community, and so that part was really a welcome relief, and I felt safe, I guess, for one of the first times in a long time, and so I, like I said, I jumped in, and next thing I knew I was going to meetings regularly. I had found a sponsor, and I was, participating in NA as an active member. This was in Southern California, which is where I grew up, and that was in 1994. And there was a lot of meetings. I also went to AA, so I feel fortunate I got clean in an area that had a lot of meetings, and I had a lot of choices, and there was a robust fellowship, and there was a lot of people that were working the program. And but at the same time, I needed some more structure, and so I actually ended up in a recovery center for 6 months, because even though I was able to find some support in NA, I still needed something more. And so finding my way into, like I said, that recovery center was really nice to, just get some further support, which without having to worry about trying to find a job and hold down a job and all that. But, and I know this is sort of a long answer, but I was really active in NA, largely, although I identify as an alcoholic, and I attended AA meetings at times as well, particularly when I would travel to more remote areas or more rural areas or whatnot, and I wanted to go to a meeting. I felt welcome and identified as an alcoholic as well. But yeah, like I said, I was active for a solid 25 odd years, and that was great for the most part. And there was a lot of growth, and I was able to start a career and become a responsible and productive member of society, like we say in NA. But at some point, like I said, around that 25-year period, I was having some other mental health challenges. I actually had been treated for depression for a long time, and then my career was as a firefighter paramedic, and I was having some symptoms that were associated with PTSD, which I was not expecting. I'll say that because at the time, which is probably the first time I was diagnosed with PTSD, I really thought that that was a condition that only military veterans were, susceptible to. There's a lot of denial in our industry that we, that it was the same risk that we were taking. There's just a lot of denial in that culture about mental health. We really didn't even talk about it much at all during the first 15 years or so of my career, though I think it was around 2012, 2013, the department I worked for, there was 2 members that committed suicide in short period. Yeah, in like a 9-month period. And so I think that was a bit of a shock. Well, of course it was a shock, but also stripped away some of the denial, sort of hey, we need to really look at this. Like I said, around that time, or maybe even before that, I had been diagnosed with PTSD and was just starting to do some therapy, specific to that, including EMDR. But fast forwarding a little bit, I think it was the summer of 2018. Was on my way back from a fire assignment in Southwest Colorado. I remember driving through the San Luis Valley, and I was listening to NPR, and I heard an interview with, yes, Michael Pollan, about his then new book, How to Change Your Mind. And it was a fascinating conversation that really introduced me to the concept of using psychedelics as a healing modality. I just, that was kind of the first I had heard of that. And I was very intrigued, for sure. And so in the ensuing year, perhaps, or more, I don't remember all the dates, but I started, quote, doing my own research, as we say, which I think research is a bit strong of a word just because I have friends that are scientists and they do like legitimate full online scientific research. But what I mean by research, man, I looked at things on the internet uh, and read articles, and I think there was a few podcasts perhaps here or there um, about psychedelic use for healing, but there wasn't a ton of information. There just wasn't a lot of people talking about it. But yeah, like I said, I explored what that possibly could look like, and so I felt that I had been spinning my wheels in NA to a certain extent, meaning I was going to meetings and I was working with a sponsor and doing service and all that, but I was still really having some serious mental health challenges. I was experiencing anxiety, which was sort of new, and some panic attacks at times. And I was miserable. I was also having, like, I guess what I now know are emotional flashbacks, per Pete Walker's book. And I was acting out in ways that, I was breaking things. I was screaming. I was like having these, like, what I'll call freakouts. So something was definitely, I needed more help. And so I had just got to the point where I knew I needed something different. I was aware of, again, people were using psychedelics. I had kind of met some people that had some experience with that. And at some point, I think it was the classic simple internet search, using psychedelics in recovery or using psychedelics while you're in recovery. And lo and behold, I found the PIR website. And I think this was about 2019 or 2020, roughly. And so I found my way into PIR before I made the choice to use psychedelics. And at that point, there was maybe 5 or 7 meetings a week. I think we had one on a daily basis, but not necessarily. Most of the meetings were, I think, like single digits, and the big meeting was 12 or 15. So we've grown a ton, which is amazing. And did you want me to go into when I first used psychedelics, or?
Do you remember now
Yeah,
talking about your
yeah,
discovery of PIR? And
yeah.
do you remember which meeting was the first one you went to?
Oh gosh, I don't. I want to say for some reason I'm just remembering Saturday morning
Live?
live,
Mm.
possibly, as it definitely was an early meeting I attended. I don't know for sure though.
And what
Yeah,
was your first impression? What did you say to yourself when you went to your first meeting? What happened, and do you remember what your thoughts
yeah.
were then?
I remember kind of going, "Wow, this is super cool that there are people that are exploring these other modalities that I think could help me." I, again, was really suffering from some serious mental health challenges, and whether it was having done therapy for many years, going to NA and AA meetings, using pharmaceutical, psychiatric meds, I needed more. I just wasn't getting the care or wasn't getting all the treatment that I needed. And so I I sensed that psychedelics could be something that helped me, but I was afraid to use anything after, like I said, 25 odd years of full and complete abstinence, with the exception of a little bit of THC use at one point, which, yeah, we can get into if we need to. But um, I thought that, well, gosh, if there's all these people that are using psychedelics, whether it's people in PIR, Michael Pollan, the people he's referenced, the different articles I've read, et cetera, et cetera. Why, if there are people getting mental health benefits, spiritual benefits from the use of these medicines, like, why would I be different just because I was, quote, an addict or, quote, an alcoholic, or I had experienced substance use disorder or whatever? Like, it just didn't make sense to me that just because I was a member of NA and, again, identified as an addict who had had a problem with substance use, that somehow these medicines wouldn't work for me. That just didn't make sense to me. And so I was definitely, like I said, intrigued. I think I felt some hope. I was curious. I thought that, wow, well, here's something that might help me. Maybe this is something to explore. Um, yeah, and it was, I guess, somewhat similar to when I first got into NA, where I felt, a sense of belonging, or that sense of hope, or okay, here's a new community of people that I could draw some experience, strength, and hope from, or just draw upon their collective experience with different healing modalities that might work for me. So, yeah, I think it was definitely, I guess I would say I felt hopeful more than anything.
And how long was it before you experienced
Yeah,
psychedelics for yourself? And how did you do that? Did you microdose? Did you
right.
have a ceremony with the therapist, the shaman? How did you go
Yeah,
about?
sure, sure. I think it was probably 6 months. I don't remember for sure, but I definitely remember talking to different members about what medicines they had used, what their experience was like what can I possibly expect? Having used mushrooms a couple of times, when I was in my early 20s, so it had been, 25 or more years. And so roughly 6 months, I think. And then outside of the rooms, had one friend that had made a connection for me with one of his friends that had been using psychedelics. Like, this friend had used psychedelics like more recreationally. He was not in recovery, but he introduced me to someone that had used psychedelics more for healing. I don't remember if they were in recovery per se, but she made a couple connections for me. And my first experience was with a therapist using a ketamine lozenges or lozenges. I can't remember if I did 1 or 2 sessions, but it was not particularly impactful. It wasn't a very deep journey. It's because it wasn't intermuscular or IV, and ketamine was just starting to kind of become a thing. Um, and so that was actually kind of odd. I found ketamine to be, given that it's associative, it was just, I didn't feel like that was what I needed. I needed more. I felt like, all right. But that felt like, I'm like, let me dip my toe into this, um, and do something lower dose and see what that's like. I didn't feel like I was ready to dive all the way in. But once I had that, again, low dose experience with ketamine, that just wasn't particularly impactful. And so I connected with someone else who was a therapist that I had a nice conversation with, and she felt that, given the trauma I had experienced, and we were initially focused, I think, on work-related trauma, she suggested that we use MDMA. And
Right.
so that is, and that felt, I trusted her. I didn't have a long-term relationship with her as a therapist, but my, again, friend's friend, who I had a couple nice conversations with, that I felt I could trust her. She recommended this therapist, and I had a good feel for her. And I was also fucking desperate. I was worried about my, I don't remember if I was actively suicidal, but I definitely had suicidal thoughts at the time. So I was fucking desperate. And so MDMA sounded like, I had never used it before, sounded like a pretty gentle medication. And I don't remember where the MAPS trials were at the time. I think possibly in the phase 2 of the FDA trials. And so again, looking at those studies, um, and seeing that, oh, there's some evidence supported by this research that veterans, I think largely were the population, they are getting significant benefit from this treatment, MDMA assisted therapy. Like, okay, again, why would I be different? Just because I was a member of NA? I mean, it just didn't make sense. So that is where I started. And I remember thinking, I don't know what's going to happen in terms of, quote, releasing my addiction all over again, as the NA book says. I felt it was worth the risk because I was really worried about my well being and my life as far as potentially dying by suicide. And so the way I've said it is it felt like the risk of not using psychedelics was greater than the risk of using them.
At some point, it becomes a risk reward.
Yeah.
And I was at the same jump off place where the risk was losing my sponsor. She'd threatened me, if you go down that route, I can't sponsor you anymore. I was new in recovery, but I had that calling, and I knew I had to go through it. I knew I had to let go of a few things that had really helped me in order to pursue this call.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I did not talk to my NA sponsor about it. I had a sense what he would say would be, no, you're going to release your addiction all over again, or just, I don't support that, or whatever the case may be. And I think that all those years in recovery, to some extent, talk to your sponsor, talk to other members. They had not lost the ability to trust my intuition, but I had been conditioned that my thinking is fucked up. My thinking is broken. I can't trust myself because I'm an addict. And so you need to run everything by someone else. And, I get that to a point. But this was something that just really felt like I needed to do, like you said. And I wanted it to be my decision. And so that was kind of unusual for me in a sense that, yes, self-will. Yeah, okay. I don't know what to say, but I chose to not tell my sponsor, at least initially. And I think after a couple of sessions, I did tell him, and then he fired me. But
Oh, well.
yeah, exactly. That relationship had really kind of run its course at that point, anyway. So that wasn't that big of a deal, really.
And how were the sessions?
Yeah, great question. Okay. Well, we did, I believe, 4 sessions spread out over a period of perhaps 6 months. And I don't think we followed the MAPS protocol to the T, actually. I don't know for sure what dosage I took because I didn't want to know a number because I didn't want to have any expectation about the type of experience I would have. But wow, well, there's a lot there that came up or that I experienced. I remember for sure dropping into the MDMA space, we'll call it, the first time. And I remember how gentle it almost felt like I was floating with a parachute and just gently coming to earth or coming down, if that makes sense. Into the space and feeling, oh God, wow, okay, I can take a deep breath and wow, okay, this feels nice. I feel safe. I feel embraced. I hadn't felt safe for a long, long time, and I don't think I've felt safe a whole lot in my life. And so, again, I don't remember the intentions I set by any means. I definitely, in general, was expecting that I was going to be working on work-related trauma. At that point, I think it was I don't know how many years as a firefighter paramedic, 17-ish, I think. And I'd worked on the ambulance for about 10 or 12 years. I've seen a plenty, I don't need to get into all those details, but boy, that job just beats you up. And being on the ambulance is really the meat grinder. But one thing for sure I remember, which was fascinating, was I don't know that I met every single person who died under my care or while I was a paramedic, but there was a whole line of them that I got to I got to meet and see and say goodbye to, if you will, and wish them the best because we didn't do that I didn't get to process those experiences. Just wasn't part of the culture, and I just, although I was in, seeing therapists, I just wasn't doing that work. And so that was really unexpected and wild because it was in a place that my therapist called the temple. Like she knows of it. I'm like, okay, cool. It had this sense of like almost like a amphitheater of stone that you might see in Central or South America, perhaps. Aztec, Mayan. I just don't know that culture super well. Anyways, it's this giant like outdoor amphitheater, um, and kind of one by one, those people um, came and I got to see them, and like I said, wish them the best and do
Yeah.
some grief work. I know, wild, totally wild. Didn't expect that. And that, I guess I would say, was somewhat the tip of the iceberg, um, because over the course of those sessions, which again I think we did four, I slowly but deeply realized and got to work on the trauma I experienced as a child. And at first, it started with the sense of being neglect, emotional neglect from my parents who just were not capable of providing me with the care and presence that I really wanted and needed as a child. And they both experienced or suffered from profound mental illness, and or they were survivors of trauma and abuse themselves. So that was really insightful to really meet my younger self or selves, including this one experience that was pretty wild, where I met a younger part, and we'll call him Little Steve, and I believe he was about 8 years old, and he was in a place that was far, far away, that he had been hanging out in until I could find him. And time gets whatever, time and space, and I'm not really great at sort of some of the esoteric or whatever aspects about time and space, but he was there in a place that felt like outer space, like really far away, not on a physical, not on Earth. Yeah, like we'll call it, he was out in outer space, which made so much sense because he needed to get the fuck out of those horrible experiences, which I'll get to in a moment. Just hanging out, he was somewhat lonely, but he felt safe, um, and that's a place that he needed to go to survive. And you might call it dissociation, you might call it soul fracturing. I'm not totally sure. In exile in IFS language, which I didn't know at the time, but I got to meet him, and over the period of, again, several sessions, I got to build a relationship with him and earn his trust, such that he took me to witness and be with him during some pretty horrific experiences that I had fully repressed for 45 odd years. I don't necessarily want to get into tremendous detail, but my mom attempted suicide at least twice while I was a child. There were times when my dad was not at home. And so I believe I was 8 years old. My brother is a year older. He was 9. And in both of those occasions, we found her and we saved her life. I basically was doing first responder work at a young age. Oh, wow. That's a lot. And I got to be there with him or them. And it wasn't like watching this experience on a screen. I mean, we were there. I mean, we were right there in the experience, and I got to be with him and support him and care for him and nurture him. And Yeah. And so I got to realize and see that I'd experienced really profound trauma at a young age, and how I had reacted or responded to that. Um, I learned about dissociation. I learned that I'd suffered, I guess we'll call it nervous system injury. Um, and of course, it was inevitable to a certain extent that I became a first responder,
Yeah,
because
this
I
is
learned, yeah,
this is
yeah.
incredible. That
Uh,
ability that psychedelics have to put the light and to help on something, on an episode of our life we've forgotten, and help us connect the dots. It, of course, all makes sense now that you have had that experience from such a young age, and the powerlessness you must have felt in a situation like this.
and the anger towards my mom and dad that I didn't get a chance to express. I wasn't safe. And the wildest thing for me is that despite having experienced, these suicide attempts and some other violent, just crazy stuff, we never talk about it. Like, I don't know. I think we never spoke a word about it, and became a family secret. So after having those experiences during those MDMA sessions, I felt like I ended up talking to my brother about, like, I wanted to confirm that was true. It was so extreme that it was hard to believe. And so I remember talking to my brother, who, although he didn't remember the specifics of those experiences, he sure didn't doubt it. And he had some other memories that definitely led, to confirm that mom had been profoundly mentally ill, and that she definitely was capable of doing something like that. But my mom also had a number of friends that she had met through her job. She was a school teacher, and they'd stayed in touch for decades, actually. It's pretty impressive. I reached out to a couple of them, and they did not remember that specifically, but again, they knew that my mom had had some mental health challenges. But what was fascinating was, I guess, despite those being close friends of my mom's, they didn't know any of those details. Like, they just didn't talk about that stuff. At least my parents didn't. It was absolutely, like you said, keep those family secrets. And God, how sick that was. And so, really, it was just even though it's been really hard to, oh man, have kind of re-experience those experiences, and have to process the feelings. Shining a light on that has been critical, and it's what needed. I mean, sometimes I wish I wouldn't have opened Pandora's box, so to speak. But that was the stuff that was running in the background, perhaps, and it was just, I needed to shine a light on those experiences to move forward, integrating these parts, integrating those experiences, and then, like you said, just getting us insight into why. Yeah, why.
Yeah.
That's the best I can say right now.
And you talk about integrating
Yeah.
those parts. That neatly brings me to my next question: is what is your integration practice?
Great question. I would say the first two things that come to mind are working with a therapist, one, and then attending PIR meetings or being involved in the PIR fellowship. And so, one, I did do actual, therapy sessions, more talk therapy with the woman that I had done the
MDMA
MDMA
sessions.
assisted. Yeah, so um, that was super useful to just talk through and have those sessions where we explored, while not under the influence of any medicine,
Mm-hmm.
about what had happened, and giving that those parts a voice. And that included sessions, but then also formal sessions. But I remember just a lot of writing, of giving those parts a voice. And again, I kind of remember, like, expressing a lot of anger and rage at my parents. And then I remember a couple of times hiking. I've always been really into the outdoors, but I remember just having these conversations out loud, like, you motherfuckers, and God damn it, mom, you had no right to do this, and I'm angry, and you betrayed me, and you didn't give me what I need, and just really literally talking out loud while out in nature to get that stuff out, which was super therapeutic because, like I said earlier, that those parts didn't have really any support or care. Back when I was a child, we didn't go to therapy. We didn't talk about it as a family, just bottled it all up. And so that was great. And then PIR meetings and or parking lots or just one-on-one conversations with PIR members about the experiences I had had. And even part of that is just holding space for other members to hear their experiences. That has been super therapeutic as well. And yeah, we talked about IFS a little bit and ACA. So I also got introduced to and got involved with ACA through the PIR Fellowship and learning about the IFS framework with my therapist. Same, like I said, a newer therapist that although I didn't do psychedelic journeys with her, she has experience with medicine. And like I said, a lot of work to spend time with those younger parts and not only give them a voice, but then be present for them as, in the context of reparenting. So, yeah, a variety of different, I guess, integration practices that come to mind.
Yeah, good. And it's coming towards the end of the podcast, but the question I ask all my guests is, what is it that you currently struggling with, or an issue that you're working on with or without psychedelics in your recovery?
What a great question. And we could go on for hours, couldn't we? Which is great. There's a lot to unpack from psychedelic use, of course. Right now, the biggest challenge is I'm going to go with parenting. We have a 14-year-old son who is not thriving. He is really struggling with academically, socially. It sounds like there's some bullying he may be experiencing, and he is acting out in anger and rage. The other night, he was hurting our dog, who's the sweetest thing ever. And then he also slapped my wife across the face. And I am very much, I guess I'll say what comes to mind is I'm powerless over his behavior, which is, I think what's going on for me is feeling responsible or it's my fault, which really takes me back to my parenting. I'm powerless and I feel like it's my fault. Oh, it goes back to my mom and how, really back to her mom and how abusive. So my maternal grandmother was telling my mom, "You're no good. You'll never amount to anything." And just how that got passed down to me as well. Not maybe those exact words, but the sense that it's my fault and I'm responsible and even I deserve to be miserable. And so parenting right now, like I said, the powerlessness and how do I show up differently than my parents? It's sometimes hard to have perspective on that because with everything that's going on with my son and his behavior, it's just, like I said, hard not to feel responsible and blame myself. But it's a chance for me to really love on myself and have compassion and grace for all of us in our family, my wife, my son, and I, kind of more immediately. But then when I look back at my younger parts and then my parents and their parents, all this intergenerational trauma, how can I, again, have the compassion and kindness and care for all of us, all my relations. That came up the other day. Someone was talking about all my relations in the context of some ceremony. So that's what's going on right now. Being gentle with myself to start, and prioritizing my mental and emotional health, my well-being. And there's a lot that goes into that. And then how can I show up for my son in a loving way with some patience, some grace and care? Because when he's acting out, it's hard not to get triggered, such that I want to act out myself because I'm in that fight or flight mode. And so, yeah, a chance to do the practices that I need to do to regulate my nervous system, which is at times very difficult with the history and the trauma and, like I said, the nervous system injury I've suffered. But I have tools and practices that can help me start by regulating myself and then showing up differently for my son.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to hear. Well, I think parenting, for me, it took me years to understand step 3. And then when I understood step 3, I was handing my will in my life, except my children. Anything touching children is difficult to hand over. And that powerlessness, I have felt that. I've got a son who's a similar age, and it's a tough time for those young men to be in this world. And where do we find the tools that we were not brought up with? And I think that's where the plant medicine world and PIR can be very helpful.
Absolutely. And I've had the chance to, and I reach out to others that have children, the same age or older, and get their experience, strength, and hope with parenting. That gives me hope, because I know quite a few people who, in PIR and elsewhere, who have either are going through similar things or have gone through challenges with their children, including kids with substance issues. And one of my friends in recovery worried that at any point he was going to get a call saying his son or sons had died from an overdose. And to hear that their kids are now thriving, or at least doing much, much better, that gives me hope. Because, my God, the shit that I did, it's as a younger person, it's really quite miraculous that I'm alive, and I would imagine, I know it's the same for many of us in recovery. So it's absolutely terrifying to think of the behaviors that my son could choose. We're not there yet. We're here. So, but the fear is real. But yeah, coming back to the present moment and literally lately, what's the next right thing? And putting one foot in front of the other. I mean, some of these mantras that we get from, recovery or elsewhere, that really is helpful.
And one that is very good from Al-Anon is put the focus on you. I think one thing that recovery has taught me is to learn to be selfish, and very different to self-centered, but look after me, put the oxygen mask on me first, because I had a tendency of being the rescuer and getting distracted from the work. But it's so difficult, especially when it comes to children.
Yeah, as a first responder all those years, we used to say, and I got pretty good about being calm and not emotional while being on those things. We'd say that, be part of the solution, don't be part of the problem, or this is not my emergency. So keeping things in perspective and showing up, like I said, in a way that's calm and measured. And I found that a lot easier to do as a first responder than to be at home with my son who's acting out. It is so challenging to stay regulated when violent behavior is occurring in my home. And so, yeah, that would say that's probably definitely the biggest challenge right now. So,
well, thank you for sharing so vulnerably and honestly with us. This is sadly all the time we have for. But thank you once again. And do you want to have a last word of wisdom before we close?
Oh, last word of wisdom. For some reason, what came to me, and it's an NA slogan, is keep coming back. or maybe AA as well.
Yes.
I've been going to some in-person AA meetings again, but I'm saying that to others as well as myself. Keep coming back and trust the process. More will be revealed. These are cliches, but that's what I need to hear. Stay involved in this fellowship or in the fellowships you're involved in, and stay connected. That's what we all need, is that connection.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Steve. And I'll speak to you soon.
Okay, thank you so much.
Psychedelics in Recovery is a peer-led fellowship guided by anonymity, non-endorsement, and mutual respect. Thank you for listening and for placing principles before personalities.